like, I'm okay if I'm not first, but I'll never be the worst person in the room. So whatever I need to do to be somewhere in the mix, that's where I'm going to push myself to. And I think if you lead with that, you end up with really good results. I don't want to eat one meal a day. I want to eat 3 meals a day, and I want them to be really good meals. We don't have to be these sort of like starving artists in order to be seen as successful amongst our peers.
What you're about to hear is the conversation the dance industry keeps having behind closed doors, and Jason is done keeping it there. We're talking about the thing most dancers are too scared to say out loud, that being business-minded doesn't make you less of an artist, it actually makes you unstoppable. Jason now has a full-blown dance media company, and he is not here to sugarcoat anything. We talk about why transparency is your greatest asset, what private equity is actually doing quietly to competitive dance, the comparison trap that is stealing your confidence, and the mindset shift that honestly hit me harder than I expected. Before we get into the episode, if this show has ever given you something, do me one favor and hit the follow button wherever you're listening and send this to one dancer or dance parent who needs to hear this today. That's how we keep getting guests like this onto the show. With that being said, let's get into it. Welcome back, you guys, to Kicking It Real. I'm here with Jason Pickett, who is a dance educator, mentor, and speaker who has spent the last 14 years in the competition world as a performer, choreographer, adjudicator, and the founder of No Starving Artists. So Jason, welcome to Kicking It Real. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so excited. We always just started off with the same two questions. So what have you been kicking it with lately?
That's a good question.
I know.
I mean, I think top of my mind is like just it's competition season. So I've been kicking it with like competitions. The convention that I'm on, Reinforced Dance Experience, we just had our second to last stop. And so that's probably like, that's kind of like the consuming my world at the moment.
Yeah, the expert, the pro, I had just said before we started recording, I'm like, your weekend looked good, chaotic, but good in the best way, inspiring.
Yeah, for sure.
We always leave that way. What are you kicking to the curb?
What am I kicking to the curb? I think actually I just had this thought yesterday. I'm kicking to the curb. I feel like for a long time I've been like in this mode of like I have to post a lot in order to stay relevant. And I think I finally am at a point where I'm like, I don't think I want to do that anymore. I think I'm really grateful that I don't need to do that anymore. And so I'm kicking that. I'm kicking like over creation to hopefully prioritize some more like meaningful projects to me.
Yeah, what a great place to be at. I for sure am not there, but that sense of, okay, like I can actually step off the break. I always create better content too when I'm not creating from that place of urgency and that place of like,
Hmm.
oh, I have a genuine thought and idea I want to share. So
Yeah.
I feel that
Yeah.
for sure. For anyone that doesn't know you, can you give us like a very over the top view of what you're doing now and how dance got you to where you are?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm a dance educator through and through. That's always been my thing. That's really how I like started with competitive dance was through teaching. Um and that's been kind of like my first passion in the world of competitive dance. I started as a freestyle dancer, and then when I found competitive dance, it was through teaching. And now I have No Starving Artists, which is a dance media company, as I like to call it, and we produce a bunch of shows on a weekly basis that basically just provide free content and education for dancers, dance parents, dance teachers, and studio owners. Um, and that's kind of been like the driving force of like everything that I do is like education at the forefront and trying to be as best of a teacher as I can be, and also to have conversations openly that uh, were conversations that I had always been a part of or had heard, but a lot of them existed like behind closed doors. And so I wanted to kind of bring those conversations to the forefront a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm very, very much obsessed with that. As you already know, you do have a good performing like resume as well, but you also got into dance late, but started teaching
Yeah,
when you were also young.
yeah.
So did you realize soon or early that you were in that education path and that was going to be your through line, or did that take some time?
No, it was really early. Yeah, I think rightfully so. I don't post a lot of dance content to begin with. Like, and what I mean by that is like I don't post a lot of content of me dancing or like even of my choreography that often. And that was part of like the experiment of growing my platform was like, could I do it without, could I like get into these spaces without ever actually showing my dancing? That was kind of like one of the thought experiments that I had leading into everything. So I think people rightfully so assume that like I have never actually worked professionally, and I have been blessed to do a lot of things. I've danced in Australia and Israel, Germany, with performing companies. I've done industrial work as well, film and TV as well. But teaching was like there from the beginning and was kind of always like the consistent thing around all of that. I was introduced to dance like through like movies, but then also through YouTube as well. And at the time that I started dancing, there was a lot of choreographers that were posting like class footage and concept video footage on YouTube. And so that was my intro to dance. So I was just kind of like, oh, okay, like people just teach dance. I don't, it's so stupid to think about now, but like I really thought that in the beginning. I was like, oh, people just teach dance and then that's just what you do. So that was kind of like how I got into things, and I think that's what I fell in love with like first after the movement was like teaching, not performing. And so um yeah, so that was kind of what made that like a through piece throughout my whole career.
That's so valid that you said that because I also go back to my childhood years and it just isn't a question you always think about. Like, oh, this is
Mhm.
just my t-shirt. That's just what it is. You don't think
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
you don't question people and authority. And that's such an interesting point to bring up. But
yeah.
moving into the starving artist, all of the, I could go on and on about all the different things it goes. We don't have to get into all of it. But just to start, I am obsessed with the name, the most creative ever. Where did you come up with that? Besides obvious reasons, but where did you come up with that? And was it in reaction to anything maybe personal that happened to you, or what was that origin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of carries a few different meanings, and I kind of allow people to explore that a little bit, because I've heard people explain my brand in ways that I'm like, "Oh, I don't know that that's what my intention was, but, like, sure, that works." But the actual meaning behind it was that, basically the idea that we don't have to be starving to be artists. Um, I felt like really early on, I started to get this feeling amongst artists that, like, if you were successful in any way, it therefore made you, like, less creative. I think it's kind of that sort of, like, sellout mindset that, like, people I think sometimes there is an undertone in the industry that like if you do things that allow you to be really successful, you're automatically not as cool or like not as like, niche.
You're trying
Which
too
I think is
hard.
a really which I think is a really interesting concept. So that was kind of like the whole, and also too like I found that a lot of people were really insecure about like regular jobs that they had, which I thought was an interesting component as well. A lot of artists like try to like unintentionally hide that they have like a normal job aside from dance. And I just feel like one, it's like disingenuous, but two, it's like it doesn't paint the full picture for a younger dancer that's like wanting to get into the industry. They may be going into it thinking that they can survive solely off of dance, when the reality is like it's very, very few of us that are able to do that. And so it's really like a small portion of the industry that just can sustain a life off of dance and teaching. And I think that number's growing more and more with like social media and with conventions being such a big thing. But yeah, so that was kind of the beginning of the brand was that idea. And I have a friend named Jadel who said something to me once, and this was kind of early on. Um, he was like, I want to eat 3 meals a day. I don't want to eat 1 meal a day. I want to eat 3 meals a day, and I want them to be really good meals. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, like that's the idea. It's like we don't have to be these sort of like starving artists in order to be seen as successful amongst our peers.
No, that's correct. I love that. And I love what you said too about the identity portion around it too, about how we feel like we can't have any other parts of us. And when I stepped back from Rockheads, I had that same thing that I was interested in podcasting, in social media. And
Yeah.
before I started posting, I was so scared to post because of what my peers would think of me, and that
Yeah.
I'm not like a real dancer. So I very much relate to that. I'm just curious, what are some of the things that people thought it stood or like they thought was the meaning behind it?
Well, I think one is like one is wrong. One I usually correct people on, which is that like the brand is somehow like we're saying we don't support starving artists, which I understand a bit, but like that's not the case at all.
Yeah, that's opposite of the
We
mission.
support all artists, but yeah, I think people just kind of really lean into like the starving artist component and just kind of like get a little bit mixed up with like what the whole purpose of things are. Um, so yeah, it's kind of just, and again, I kind of I never minded too much because I'm just like, I want it to be, I want it to represent whatever you feel like it represents for you on your journey. And the same thing with the content. Like I want it to resonate with you however and wherever you are in your individual journey.
Yeah, for sure. And you obviously have a very good business approach to that as well, that you're able to translate that
Yes.
message, which is
Yeah.
awesome. And did you feel that you carried that feeling of not being a real artist for a long time, or what was the catalyst that allowed you to step fully into that and be like, no, I'm just as much of an artist and I'm going to pursue this and show this to the world?
Yeah, I it's a good question. I mean, I always created content because that's how I was introduced to teaching and to dance was through like YouTube and through online
Hmm.
content. So I always created content from the beginning of my teaching, whether it was like concept videos. I actually dabbled with like similar content to what I make now. More like I guess you could call it like motivational, educational content. I think at the time I hadn't actually lived it, so it didn't feel right. Like the lens that I was speaking on it through didn't resonate with people because they could tell that it was inauthentic in the sense that I hadn't experienced it yet. I don't necessarily like looking back at some of those older videos, I don't necessarily think that I was off. I think I was speaking like truth, but I think it just didn't resonate because you could tell that it wasn't my truth yet.
Yeah.
Um and so I think that that is like part of it. And I think also too, like I struggle with a lot of the things that a lot of us do. I think, the constant sort of like fear that I'm not like relevant enough or my choreography is not good enough or people will tell you little things along your journey whether it's like your choreography is not good or you know something that sticks out to me that someone told me once was like you're a competition choreographer and like you're like a dance studio choreographer and like that's something that's always kind of bugged me. It's always been like a chip on my shoulder of like what does that even mean and also like no, I don't know. And so I think I've always been able to like overcome those things because I have like a really solid view of like my self value and like what I bring to the table. But it's still, those little things still affect me from time to time. And I think that that like sometimes digs at your artistry and makes you second guess like what choices you want to make or should make. Um, and so I don't know. I feel like I got a little bit off the
That's
page there,
okay.
but yeah, I think that's like I think that that's kind of like as I progressed through, as I found dance, as I danced professionally, as I progressed through my teaching, made a lot of mistakes, made some good choices, some bad choices. I think that like my artistry just naturally sort of developed through that process. And also because I was learning to dance at the same time that I was learning to teach, it was a very interesting journey as an individual.
Yeah, that would be like imposter syndrome to the extreme, I would
Right.
imagine,
Right.
which is interesting. How did you get into teaching at the same time?
Yeah, so I was like I said, I was introduced to dance like through a freestyle
Mhm.
component. Going to like parties, which sounds crazy because I started when I was younger, but
Yeah.
there was school dances were still like I don't feel like they're really that big of a thing anymore. But in like junior high, we had a lot of school dances.
Mhm.
And then also, um, weirdly enough, this is like I don't know that this exists anywhere else, but in Utah, for whatever reason, there was this like period of like 2 to 3 years where we had like several 16 and up clubs. So they were like full
Oh.
on clubs, but they were for like 16 and older. And you can
That's so
imagine why
fun.
they inevitably got shut down. But so I got to have like a legitimate club experience when it comes to dance, like in my high school years, which was really, I don't feel like, way back when that could happen because you could get into
Yeah,
clubs like without being 21. But
for sure.
nowadays, that that's not something that you could really experience. Um, and so I had a sense of like dance from that standpoint, like from the freestyle battling standpoint. And then I was like, I want to teach. I knew somebody that taught at a studio. And so I just reached out to her and I was like, hey, could you get me a job? And she was like, sure. So I went into the studio. And yeah, I knew how to dance, but I definitely didn't know how to teach. And I didn't really have a full scope of like what dance even was. But I was so obsessed with it that like that never even really crossed my mind as a concern because I was like, I've always just had this undying thought of like, I'll just figure it out. Like if there's
Yeah.
something I don't know, I'll just figure it out. There's no reason I can't. And so I would go to conventions with the kids that I was teaching, and I would like, I would band like teacher band in the senior room. Like there was a couple years where I even was still like had a number and was like auditioning while like teaching. I wasn't actually like a comp dancer. Um and then I also did like some privates throughout like those beginning years for things like people think I hate ballet, but I did some ballet privates for several months. Um Especially once and that was when I started preparing to judge, because I didn't want to go into judging like not knowing what I was doing. And so yeah, did some tumbling privates for a little while. And I've always had like a component of training that like stays with me. Like even now, like on convention weekends, um, I take class every single stop that we have. I take class when I have an open hour from the other faculty that I teach with. And so yeah, that's always been like a component of me is like teaching and like training underneath that. I think I equally love both things.
That's so fascinating because I've watched, of course, your critique videos, and you would never ever guess that you didn't start in classical training because it's very evident you have such an understanding of the technique and the artistry of it, which I guess maybe
Yeah,
also helped you because you didn't start in a technical place. You came from a love and an artistry rather than strict technique, which there's
yeah,
good and
yeah,
bad. And also they say if you really know something to be an expert, you should be able to teach it. So I'm sure it just almost like amplified your timing and being
yeah,
able to grow in that way,
yeah,
which
100%.
you've also done a million things and are still doing a million things. And you're, like you said, running pretty much a full media company. So
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
business side of it, what does a week look like for you? A typical week so we can have a picture of your life.
That's a good question. Yeah. I think it would surprise people. I work probably less than people think I do because I prioritize a lot of time like with my family, or at least I try to. Um, but it's pretty blocked out at the moment. So every day starts around like 5:36, just depending on when I get up. And then I usually start um on any given day throughout the week. I either at 6:30, I'm either down here in my office working on like emails and editing, or I'm doing mentorship calls, which is a big part of my like personal brand. Um, and so if it's a mentorship day, then I'll usually have mentorship calls from 6:30 to 8 a.m. And then after that, I take my son to school, come back home. I'm usually editing or filming dance critiques, and then son comes home from school, kids take a nap around 12:31, and then that's when I start up mentorship calls again. So that's like my midday early afternoon calls from 1 to 3. And then depending on the day as well, that could also be private lessons, which is something I've started doing just recently here in Utah, is in-person private lessons. And then after 3, that's pretty much like family time until the evening. And then I usually have 1 to 2 more mentorship calls in the evening, um, from about 8:30 to 9. So that's pretty much the schedule at the moment. And then each day, my workload kind of depends on like it depends on the show that releases that day. So like Monday is when our namesake podcast episode releases. Tuesdays I have a series called Bite Size Stories, which is highlights like individual artists. And that one, there's not much prep for because the artists do all the uh, creation and editing themselves. I just post it. And then Wednesdays is a co-hosted podcast that I have called the Side Dish Podcast. And then Thursdays I have a long form YouTube show called Idea, where I just kind of like talk about a singular topic for 15 to 20 minutes. And then on weekends, so that's Monday through Thursday. And then I'm usually either flying out on Thursday or Friday for either convention, competition, or guest teaching around this time of year.
Love that. That's your version of I don't work that much. No, but you do
It
so.
doesn't feel like that much. It's not like a 9 to 5. Like, it's not like I'm, like, clocking, like, 8 hours every single day for one consistent block. It's very, like, segmented up. So that's why I think it feels like it's not
Yeah.
that much.
And you probably love what you're doing, so that also helps a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's great. I mean, yeah, I've had normal jobs before and, you know, I had a great time with those as well, but this is just different.
Yeah, I always say that too, where I'm like, I just don't know. I don't think I could ever be at a desk like 9 to 5, just doing busy work. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be one specific answer, but
Mhm.
I am also obsessed with the idea of transferable skills from being a dancer to literally anything, which you do
Yeah.
a ton of different things, even though they're in the dance realm. What were the skills that were maybe most surprising to you that you didn't even think about until you were using them?
When it comes to, like, dance into the real world?
Yeah, or like running a business or starting a
Yeah.
podcast, all of those.
I mean, I think the communication skills are like have been invaluable. I've always felt like I was pretty good at communicating, but I think teaching like really, I mean, it was when I was really teaching, I was teaching like 5 days a week at it would be anywhere from like 3 to 4 studios, different studios, for 4 to 5 hours each day. And so, that's a lot of like cutting your teeth with like speaking to humans and like trying to get them to do what you want them to do. And I did that for like 10, 11, 12-ish years. So I mean, that's a lot of time like communicating with people and like trying to like, again, like I just have this sort of like constant, like I want to just I always want to get better. Like I always want to just continue to get better at what I'm doing. And so it was, that many hours multiplied by me wanting to be the greatest teacher I could ever be. Um, and so the communication is like, I think, unmatched for sure. And I think those like leadership skills that you develop as well are really unmatched. Um, I think the other thing that like just individually has always been kind of a superpower of mine is I have like really strong inference skills. So I don't need a lot of information to get really good at something really quickly. Um which is just like again, it's like just an individual superpower that I feel like I didn't really realize until much later on in my life that like and I think that's why like I was able to jump into judging so quickly with I mean, like you said, with not the same amount of experience as other people, is I can, take a very tiny piece of information and expand that really quickly. Um, and so that's something that like has definitely helped me when it comes to like business and with dance and teaching. I also do have a marketing degree as well, which is a big value add for what I do. And that's sort of always been the adjacent industries that I've worked in. Starting from around the same time that I started teaching, I started doing outbound sales and marketing, and then I kind of kept that. That was the industry that I was involved in, us adjacent to dance, through my whole career.
Yeah, it's so nice when those things kind of work out that way, maybe when you weren't
Yeah,
even planning for it to happen
for
that way,
sure, for sure,
which
for
is
sure.
really, really nice. Which when you now the business is a huge thing with the podcast, the clothing line, the
Yeah,
mentorships, everything.
yeah.
How I know you had marketing experience, but how did you know when to expand and what did it start as, like when it was first rolled out?
Well, that's a good question. It was either clothing or critiques. Well, okay, so I had my wife and I had a clothing brand pre-COVID. called Convi, and we did clothing, and then we hosted a summer workshop as well, here in Utah. And so we did that for several years. And right when it started to get like, mildly successful, COVID happened, and then we just stopped it, and we just never picked it up again after that. And then flash forward, I kind of wanted to start creating clothing that was like, I don't like dance wear. Just
Same.
with full transparency, like it's just not like I like the idea of it, and I think it's like a useful thing to have. But like I like sometimes I'm like put off by like the amount of dance wear companies that there are, and so I wanted to create some clothing that like represented dancers that don't want to wear those things. Maybe maybe they're not comfortable wearing those things, or maybe they just don't like them. And so I wanted the clothing that I made to kind of represent that community of people, and also be clothing that you could wear like outside of like convention rooms. Like you could wear it just to school or day to day, and like it would still be something interesting. And so the clothing started at that was kind of, I think, the first component of the brand. And then after the clothing, shortly thereafter was the dance critiques. And the dance critiques, I actually just told this story to somebody, but the dance critiques I started for free actually. So once I started getting like a following online, I was like, okay, how am I going to monetize this? Because I knew that I wasn't going to make much money off of like views. And I knew that I also wasn't going to be super, uh, attractive to brands for brand deals because of the content that I was creating. And so, yeah, so I was like, if you want to get your routine critiqued, send me an email, send me the routine, and I'll critique it. And I got hundreds of emails. And then what I did is I was like, so that was the answer to question one, which was like, is this interesting to people? Yes. And then the next question became, okay, what do I charge? So then what I did is I would send them back their critique. And in the email, I would just be like, here's my Venmo. If you liked the critique, feel free to donate some money. No pressure if you don't want to. So then I was able to gauge, like, some people would give a lot of money, some people would give a little bit. And then there was a middle ground where was kind of the sweet spot. And so I was like, okay, cool. That's what people are willing to pay for this service. And so then I just rolled it out as a paid service. And then really quickly, I was like, okay, I don't want this to live as just like clothing, because I was like, I don't think clothing is going to scale well for me. The dance critiques are hard because it's just me and it's seasonal. And so then that's where sort of like the whole broader media component came into play. And I don't know that I'm necessarily like, it's interesting because I'm not a consumer of Barstool Sports from the standpoint of like, I don't really watch much of their content. I'm just not into sports, and like I don't necessarily align with all of their like values, but the structure of the company is really intriguing to me, and it was sort of the kind of the first of its kind. And so that's been sort of the model the past year or two, is like, how could I create something that's similar to Barstool Sports but in the dance space, and would it scale in a similar way? And so that's where sort of all the different shows came into play, is like, okay, how can I create a show for every day of the week, kind of with the idea of like, if No Starving Artist was like a network TV channel, and these were all sort of the individual shows that live underneath it.
That's so genius. And I know that that's what all the slogan is. And now how you described it, I'm like, oh, I 100% see
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Like, that's so cool. I mean, I'm also not a huge Barstool like
Yeah, I
person,
just
but
don't watch sports like at all. So it's like I wouldn't even, if I watch sports, I probably would consume their stuff more, but I
y-
just I just don't.
no, for sure. Which is it's what an untapped market too. And it's just such a different industry in the sense of sports have been televised forever now and social
Yeah.
media is newer. So there's
Yeah.
just it's just very much evolving in that way. So it's very exciting to
Yeah,
see
and
where that's gonna go.
traditional like dance media is just stale. It's really
Ugh.
stale at this point, and it's like I go on these websites because in our show, The Side Dish, we do like a news segment, so I'm always looking for like dance news, and you go on these dance media websites, and it's like it's just it's just sponsored articles from like companies trying to get exposure, and it's like, this isn't actual news, like this isn't actual coverage of anything. It's just just ads in news format.
Yeah, and, like, too almost too journalism-y, where it's not,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
real
it's just
people just
not
talking.
yeah, it's not interesting to me at least.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah.
I agree with that. What an untapped market, I'm obsessed. D You pride yourself, moving on, to, on transparency and consistency, which
Mhm.
I feel like you could probably speak on this even better than I could. Consistency is almost like a hard thing to sell to younger dancers now because of that instant gratification concept.
Yeah.
Wanted to see if you had tangible examples of consistency in the terms of no starving artists that you could be like, this is how my consistency paid off. So everyone start doing it.
Yeah, I think I'm the example of it I like I said, I went into when I was like, okay, let me start creating content really consistently. I was like, let me see if I could create content that was not dance content. Um, and I've been a little bit more like confident in making this statement as of recently. But like when I started creating the content that I did, like there wasn't really anybody doing it. It
Yeah.
was a lot of just like people were filming themselves in the classroom, but they were filming their combinations. They weren't filming like themselves teaching. They weren't filming like that, the interaction with the kids. They weren't doing anything thing like that. And so I kind of took inspiration from another person that like I used to kind of consume their content a little bit more, but there's a guy in the marketing world called Gary Vaynerchuk. And so I was kind of like, what would like the Gary V of dance look like? And that was kind of like the blueprint for a lot of my earlier content was just this like raw, unfiltered, like very transparent content. And I was like, let me just do this. Like, let me just be very consistent with it. And let me not care about the views. Let me not care about the engagement. And let me see if I could just get into these spaces without having to like showcase my choreography and compete in that world. And it worked. It worked. And and then it translated to like, okay, cool. Now I want to do what I've always wanted to do, which is teach on a dance convention. So let me start putting that out into the universe. And that was about a year of me sort of like networking with people, putting that out, asking questions, putting together reels, and then that was fulfilled. And so I think it really is like you have to be confident in what you bring to the table. Like if you and it has to be dialed in. I did an early episode of my podcast with Francisco Gela, and I asked him like at the end of the episode, I would always ask guests like kind of a personal question, and so we ended the episode, and I was like, I want to teach on a convention, and the first thing he said was like, "Are you ready? Like if you were to be put on a stage tomorrow, like are you ready?" And and that really made me like think like kind of just again like am I. And so I think you do have to know, like you have to know when you're ready to like go into that consistent mode. Like your training has to be there, what you're bringing to the table, what you're offering, your marketability, all of the above. And once I felt confident with all of those things, then it was just like, okay, let me just do it and put the content out there. And even if not everybody in the world is seeing it, it only takes the right people to see it for something to happen. You don't need to get millions of views. You just need to get views from the right people in order for them to believe in what you're doing. And I think it goes with dance training as well, is it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to stop. It's easy to feel like you're not progressing or that people are getting better than you. Um, but I think it's just knowing that like everybody's individual journey is so different and you can't compare your journey to the person next to you because you just don't know where people are going to be. We hear these stories all the time of, the dancer that was like the it kid at their studio and then they move to LA and they fizzle out and they're not able to book work. And then you hear of the story of the kid that wasn't that person at their studio, that was maybe a back row dancer or maybe I don't know, maybe they weren't even in comp routines. Like I've heard crazy stories, and then they go to LA or New York and they end up finding their people and finding their stride and like they excel. So it's not the hard part about dance is it's not easily measurable. It's really hard to measure your progress. It's really hard to measure where you stack up against everybody else. You just have to do the thing and you just have to keep doing the thing until you finally get to where you want to be.
I love the concept of
you have to know that that question, "Are you ready?" Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of silly, but it's almost like dating when they say, "When you know, you know." It's almost like that, where it's that feeling of, "Oh, wait, no, I am ready to do this." And that doesn't mean 100% I'm gonna book this job or I'm gonna get this gig, but
Yeah.
that ability within yourself that you're able to do that, which I love. And I love the not being the most talented dancer. I also believe in that because the people who grew up getting everything never learned that skill of being consistent and working hard and really wanting it. And when it gets hard, then they
For sure.
just fizzle out. Do you see that a lot with your mentorship and that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think yeah, there is sometimes I think it's sometimes harder for dancers who if dance came easier to them, I think sometimes it's harder for them to like self-critique and self-correct because they're not really sure why things are happening. Versus, a dancer who maybe they had to work a little bit harder, they're probably already used to that process of like figuring out what's wrong or figuring out why they can't get something. And so that's definitely something that's like stood out to me. Um and yeah, I think it just like, dance was not, I think there was components. I think this is how it is for everybody. There was components of dance that came very easily to me, but there was other components that did not, that were really, really tricky for me to get the hang of. And I think it's also being okay with experiences that like weren't your best work, but like you were better for it afterwards. Like I did a year contract with a professional company, and looking back, like if I could go back now, I would be way better on the company. I think in the moment I was not like it was such a learning process for me that I wasn't like at my best, but partially like that was a big component of like my journey that allowed me to get to a next level of myself. So I had to go through sort of this experience where I wasn't the best. I was not like the person, like I wasn't getting solos. I was not like I was on like a temporary contract the entire year that I was on the company. And it was like, all right, let's do this show and then we'll review your contract again. And so like that, it was kind of this uphill climb. But then afterwards, I was like, okay, cool. That was a really valuable experience to me. And I think sometimes dancers they don't want to do that. They don't want that like discomfort of like being bad. But you have to be bad sometimes in order to get really good.
Yeah, and that concept of sometimes experiences were just there to get you to what where you're supposed to be next. And even it's hard sometimes, especially as a dancer when you're performing, because it feels very consuming and end all be all. And
Yeah.
I'm not good enough, and all of the emotions that go into that versus, oh, maybe I'm actually meant to do something else, and this was just my stepping stone
A
to get
hundred
there,
percent.
which
A
is
hundred percent.
most things in life. I wanted to circle back to the transparency piece for just a second because I love it. I actually, we were talking also before this. I found you through your controversial take on the Timothy Chalamet. I don't even know if I'm
Uh-huh.
saying his name right. Situation, which also to preface to people listening, like I actually reached out to Jason because I thought it was so admirable to be able to not only share an opinion confidently, but just to me personally, thought you got your point across very well, very eloquently,
Yeah.
even though maybe not everyone else felt that way. Why do you feel that these takes and transparency in conversations are so important?
I think because I think like there's a lot of I remember I took a teacher class at a convention once, and the person teaching the class, she was a studio owner, and she brought up this word of like sacred cows. And she was saying how there's like we have a lot of sacred cows in dance. And basically there are these things that like they seem like untouchables that we can't change, we can't adjust because that's just the way they are. That was the way that I learned them. That's the way that my teacher taught me. That's the way that I learned it. So that is the way that it is. And there's a lot of those in dance. There's a lot of these things that we do that are probably not the most efficient thing possible, or the most effective, but we just do them because that's how we were taught. And and I think also there's this double-edged sword to a component of the arts where there's a lot of preservation, which I think is really valuable. But I think that sometimes we overemphasize preservation and we compromise like evolution and adaptation. And you don't see this in other things. I'm a proponent of like dance is not a sport. And I think there's a lot of reasons why it's not a sport. And I think this is one of those reasons, is that in sports, evolution and adaptation is like that's the goal. You're constantly trying to figure out what is the next best way to do something. What's the next most efficient way to do something. Um and in dance we tend to not have that at the forefront as much. And so to me, my transparency and my seeking of conversation is to combat that a little bit, to kind of create dialogue to where people can be like, oh, maybe what I was taught isn't, exactly what I thought it was. Because the truth of the matter is there are some very incorrect things that get taught at dance studios, and people don't want to admit that they're wrong. And I think that that's like really damaging, because I think you have to be able to admit that like you've taught something wrong. There's been plenty of times when I've gone back to my students and been like, "Hey guys, I'm sorry, like I gave you this piece of information, it's not correct. Here's the correct piece of information." And there's a lot of educators that don't want to do that. Um and I think that also, like, it's just important to me to strike dialogue, because there's a lot of people that feel outcasted in the dance industry, and they don't feel like they can say anything, whether it's out of fear for not being able to work, whether it's a fear of, people not liking them. And so, I think that's also a component of why I do what I do, is to show that, like, no, you can be transparent and you can have honest opinions, and people will still hire you, will still support you, will still want to be around you. And in fact, you'll find people that actually do want to be around you. Like I think that's a really big value out of like what I do, is I know that the people that are inviting me to their studio or inviting me to be a part of their event, they know what they're getting into. They know what I stand for. They know what I talk about. So if they've asked me to come be a part of their event, I know that I'm probably in a pretty safe space, and that these people probably align pretty closely with my values and morals, as opposed to like, for a lot of artists, they're constantly going into spaces where they don't really know if they're actually supported in those spaces or not. And then it creates this sort of like false confidence and false narrative of who you are, because you're just kind of always bending to the situation.
Oh, that's very real. And yeah, I'm processing because I've experienced that a lot, and I totally agree with your take on the lack of, what did you say? I had to write it down. Selective support in fear of
Yes.
losing opportunities,
Yeah.
which I don't know if you've had specific instances of this, or I know you also had mentioned the private equity part of it. And me also coming from a background of working for a public company, I feel that that could also have a lot of effect on different dancers and different opportunities, and wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I've absolutely had situations of people not, not supporting me, or people that did support me that denounced their support, I guess you could say, which is always really
Hey,
dramatic. Like when
I
people
was
do
just
that,
gonna
like
say drama.
it's always really, really dramatic. Like people for some reason feel the need to like tell me when they're gonna unfollow me, which is like such an odd thing to do. Because I actively encourage, like, if my content really makes you that upset, you can just unfollow me. It's not that big of a deal. Like I'm not gonna take it offensively. It's not like I'm scrolling through my followers to see who follows me and who doesn't. Like I really don't care. So yeah, I've definitely lost things, but the ironic part is like, because I hear that sentiment so much, people like, I could never make the content that you do because I would lose jobs. And I'm like, well, the ironic part is like all of the jobs that I have gotten and the success that I've had is all because of the content that I've created. That's sort of the irony of it. And I'm very lucky to be surrounded by people and supported by people who like fully support me, like maybe even more than they should. And so, I'm very lucky in that aspect, that like the people that hire me are like, no, keep creating stuff, like keep doing it. We want you to keep doing it. And it's like, okay, great. Um, as far as like the private equity thing goes, I think that does create a very interesting uh component to all of this. And I think I've gotten more hardlined on this in the past couple of months, and I think I'm at a point where I'm very against it. I'm very I'm very anti private equity in dance. I think it's way more damaging than it is beneficial. Um, and I think that it discourages creativity, it discourages artistry, because at the end of the day, it's not even it's not a personal thing. It's at the end of the day, these companies are rightfully so. They are they have shareholders and stockholders that they are held to, and they have to make sure that they are profitable. That is the number one goal of any fund, whether it's a private fund, whether it's a an equity fund, whatever it is. They have to be profitable. That's the only way that their whole company exists. If they were taking on companies that were red, they wouldn't be around. No one would give them money. They have to be profitable. And so with that comes sacrifice, because when you're just seeking profitability, it's there's things that you have to sort of like streamline and be efficient with, and there's corners you have to cut, and there's all of these things that have to happen in order for that to be the case. And I mean, we're seeing that. We've seen it in real time with events that have gotten taken over by private equity, and the quality of the event overall goes down, because it's also just, when it's someone that started the event and they're running it, there's a level of care and love that gets put into that event that a private equity company just doesn't have, because they don't
Yeah.
care or
They're in it
love
for the
it.
money.
They if that company goes under, they have a portfolio of hundreds of others. It doesn't matter to them. So yeah, I think it's really damaging, and I think that I am not judgmental, but I'm definitely get wary of any artists that like actively support privately held, like private equity, um or publicly operated companies. I there is a part of me that's kind of like, I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a world or way in which it could steer away from private equity, public companies, and still be profitable and
Yeah,
not
I think
be starving
that
artists?
Yeah, I think we are in it very deep at this point. I think much deeper than people realize. I mean, I think the majority of events that people are going to are underneath some sort of fund at this point. Um, and I think that the only not resolution, but the only thing moving forward that can happen is people starting their own events, which is absolutely possible. But it does become harder when you have these large companies. Like if we look at Rise, which is like the newest kind of kid on the block here, that just kind of got announced. This is a brand new convention that is coming out of the gate with like 20 plus stops. Uh, if
Wow.
I were to start a convention, there's no way that I would be able to come out with 20 cities my first season. It's just not financially possible, because you have to pay up front for those venues. Like you have to pay to
Yeah.
reserve those spaces. You have to pay deposits. You can't just like be like, I maybe want to do it and then maybe I'll cancel later, because then you get
Yeah.
cancellation fees. Like you can't do that. And so what happens is companies that are starting out, it becomes increasingly more difficult for them to compete, because these large companies are funding these events, and they're allowing them the resources to be able to come out of the gate with state of the art sets and state of the art websites and all of this stuff that other companies just aren't able to do. And again, that's not a knock to anyone that's necessarily involved with these events. Like it's congratulations to you guys. Like for those people that are involved, it's an incredible opportunity. But I think it's irresponsible to disregard that it does affect smaller to medium sized businesses, and that just kind of is the facts of the matter. I mean, we see
Yeah.
this in every single industry. I mean, you don't see, mom and pop grocery stores in large cities anymore because of Walmart and Target. Like, it's just this is just how it works. And that's what we're seeing now in the dance industry is these Walmarts and Targets are sort of taking over the space and, creating a place that's just really hard to compete in.
And it's interesting being in an industry that is an arts industry which at least started as more of the arts and the
Yeah.
love of that versus
Yeah.
the money making business. It's the same as when not the same, but when I was thinking about opening a fitness studio, I was like, well, I'm not really going to make any money doing it. I would do it because I love it,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
isn't necessarily right or wrong, but it's just an interesting. I love that answer. I wanted to circle back really quick before moving on to. I know I jumped ahead a lot. The the transparency online, that
Hmm.
whole era where you I love your answer to that and how you want to start the conversations and how you've lost some opportunities or people in your life. Did you always have that sense of self and I'm going to just say my truth, or do you think that took a lot of time to kind of get that skill?
Yeah, no, it's taken time. It's taken time for sure. There's a lot of things that like I feel like there's projects and people that I worked with in the past that I don't know that I would have worked with now. Just because I just didn't know any better and I was young and I didn't know that I had a voice in these spaces. And I was kind of in that same mindset is like if I had a voice, then I wouldn't get work or I wouldn't be able to like be successful. And so no, it took me a very long time. And also with full transparency, I was able to start doing it because I had a really good full-time job. And so I was kind of like, I don't care if this works out. Like if it doesn't work out, it's fine. And so I think that that allowed me the room to experiment and test and like try things and come to the conclusion of like, okay, this does work. You can be transparent and honest online and people will still hire you and still book you. And so yeah, I think that it definitely took a lot of time and it took a lot of time for me to say no as an artist too. Now it's like much easier for me to say but it was very hard for me to say no for a very long time.
And I think it's that concept too of having a little bit of proof to back yourself up and almost give
Yeah.
yourself that self trust of like, wait, I've done this and I have this under my belt and that under my belt. Because I also get that for maybe a younger dancer who's still starting out their career. It is, and I'm sure in, like you said too, in other industries other than just dance, of you have to kind of say yes to some things because you got to work your way up and have something to stand on. So that's also a good point of having the full-time job on
Yeah,
top of that.
100%. Yeah, and I mean, I had when I started creating everything. I mean, I had a house. We had two car payments, kids. Like, I couldn't just jump ship and like hope for the best. Like, I had to really make sure that it was like sustainable. And so it was probably like a year of me like really diligently tracking like how much money I was making, how much I was spending, what was actually happening in order for me to be able to be like, okay, I can get rid of my full-time job now. But it was, I was very scared to do that for a long time.
I mean, that is scary. Is that something that you are hoping to help dancers with in the future as part of the monetary and the evolution of that? Are you looking at a lot of social media things, or in what ways are you trying to help dancers get out of that no starving or the starving artist narrative?
Yeah, I think I am. And I have already. Like I mean, anybody that has like reached out to me hopefully can testify to this, but like I will give anybody any information they want or need at any point in time. Um, with that idea that like I want people to be successful and I want people to be, able to be self-sustaining. What I've found unfortunately is that people just don't want to do the work. This is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's not easy. It's a lot of like it takes a lot what I speaking to what I do. It takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of like self-security. And the truth of the matter is like the amount of people that I have given information to and the amount of those people that have actually acted on that information are very far and few. Because it just all boils down to a lot of the similar topics that we've been talking about is people just they don't want to put themselves out there like that. They think that it makes them look corny or embarrassing or whatever. And they're striving for something that is the 1% of the 1%. They want to be choreographing the Gap commercials and doing all these things that like are, for a lack of a better word, I just think this word like paints the picture really well. They want to be doing things that are like sexy culturally. They want to do those things. And I don't mean like sexual. I mean things that are like cool and interesting and like,
Yeah.
in the zeitgeist. That's what artists want to do. And I get that 100%. And there's a component of me that's like, I want to do that too. But I also have to come to the realization of like, I also want to have a life. Like I, I want to have a home. I want to have a car. I want to be able to like take my family on trips. Like I want to be able to retire one day. And I don't want to be competing for a slice of the pie that's like this big when there's this whole other area of things that is not as competitive. You just have to be willing to like put in the work.
Mm, yeah, I love that. I've talked recently with some people too. I don't know what it is I went to college for dance, and something about being in that younger mindset too of there's those certain things that make you successful. So when you do the Gap
Yes.
commercial, now you're
Yes.
successful, where it's
Yeah.
like really getting into a space that you can start to define what success looks like for you. Because I'm the same as you, where I've always had that pull to be like, no, I actually want other things. I don't want to
Yeah.
just be in the starving artist, lack of a better word. It's just so good.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
good. Use it all
Yeah.
the time. I wanted to go into a little bit more of the mindset things before we wrap up, because I'm also a very obviously big believer in the power of mindset. Is there something that has been a common mental block you have seen with dancers, and what do you recommend them doing to get through that?
I think comparison is like a huge thing that's kind of like very invasive in dance right now. And I think it affects teachers, it affects studio owners, it affects dancers, choreographers. And a majority of my mentorship kids that on board with me, comparison is like the number one thing that they're trying to get over. Um, and I always just kind of help to paint the picture that like again, we can't compare journey to journey. Like we're not all in one straight line and we're just sort of like all racing in the same direction on the same exact path. We all have our separate sort of path like laid out side by side. And so sure, like I can look over and see somebody else that's a little bit farther along their journey than me, but that has nothing to do with my individual pathway. And they might hit a roadblock at some point and I might pass them, and then I might hit another roadblock and they might pass me again. And that's just kind of like the game of life that we're all playing. And so you can't, it's not worth to compare. And I think also sometimes we compare what that person has that's better than us, but we neglect the things that we have that are better than what they have. And I think that's what I try to really teach my mentorship kiddos is like, it's okay to recognize differences between you and your peers. It's okay to see another dancer and be like, wow, they're really good at, turns, or they have really flexible legs. But then we always have to hit that with a but statement of like, but I'm really good at performance or I'm really good at this, because we don't all have the things. Like there's a lot of things that I don't have, but there are some select things that I have as a dancer that very few people have because I've trained for those things. I like those things. Those are the things in dance that I like. And so I've put a lot of my time and effort into those things and making them really good. Um, in order for me to stand out on my own. And so that's really kind of like what I usually try to like coach my kids into is like, let's figure out what your superpowers are and let's focus on those. And then comparison is going to happen because we're humans, but we're not going to focus on it and we're not going to allow it to snowball into something much bigger.
Yeah, and I love the concept too. You mentioned earlier about how being able to inference and having a little bit of information is a superpower you had, but
Yeah.
it probably took you longer to figure that out, because we often think that everyone has our superpower because it's just natural to us.
Yeah.
And being
100%.
able to use that data and be like, okay, this is what I like, this is what I'm good at, and it's just hard. I think growing up in general, and we all have it, but that's the same as me, where I grew up constantly comparing, and it's why I started posting my things too, because I let that get me down for so long. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And
nice
I
to
mean,
yeah.
it's really difficult, and I think a lot of humans struggle with it, and I just, I was one of the lucky few where, like, there was very few people in my life that were telling me that I couldn't do things. I grew up mainly with my mom, and she was, like, very supportive of every single thing that I ever wanted to do. Like, there was never, we were not well off by any means, but it was like never a question of if I wanted to do something, like she figured it out. And when I would go to visit my dad, like the mindset that I got from him was like, if you don't know how to do something, there's a video about how to do it. So figure it out. And so
Figure
it
it
was just,
out.
there was never like there was never a point in my life that I can think of where I was met with something and I was like, I can't do this. It was just like, I don't know how to do it yet, but I can figure it out. And I still have that like, mindset now where it's like, I'm never, and I think I pair that a lot with like, and I try to pass this along to students as well, as like my mantra for a lot of my life was like, I'll never be the worst person in the room. Like I'll do like I'm okay if I'm not first, but I'll never be the worst person in the room. So whatever I need to do to be, somewhere in the mix, that's where I'm going to push myself to. And I think if you lead with that, you end up with really good results.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. I don't wanna be the worst person in the room, which in
Yeah.
the context is so awesome because you also don't wanna be the best person in the room necessarily
No, I don't
either
care
because
because it's like when I did the company, I think that's really when it got instilled in me even more is because I was like, I mean, really quickly, I'm like, all right, these people have been doing this specific company for over 10 years. There's no way I'm going to outdance them. They know these pieces, they know them like the back of their hands. We're in ballet class, they know all of the sequences that we're doing. I've never even taken a ballet class aside from the private lessons or convention. I've never taken a group ballet class before. And so, I was like, "There's no way." And so then I was like, "Okay, well, who's the worst person in the room? Let me just get better than them, because then at least like I'll feel like I accomplished something, you know." And it wasn't
yeah.
like, I don't say that to like be rude to anybody, but it's just like, what, like, where is the bottom? Let me at least strive to be above that bar. And again, I think when you do that, you put yourself into this mode where you're just like consuming at like a massive, massive level, and it doesn't become daunting because I think when you're shooting for number one, that can be a really scary target. But when you're just like, I don't want to be the worst, that's a much lower bar, but it puts you in the same mindset.
Yeah, it's that 1% better every day. You don't have
Yeah,
to when you look at the whole journey, it's a lot more overwhelming than if you look at
exactly.
what's my next step. Yes.
A
If
100%.
someone if there was a dance educator or a current performing dancer that wanted to get into social media and get into that space, to get into that business headspace, what would your advice be to them?
You just do it. I mean, I think that's really what it boils down to is you just have to do it. I think a lot of us are doing really cool stuff that other people would resonate with. That's the key. Is like we sometimes are like no one's going to care about this, and it's so far from the truth. There's a whole community of people that are waiting for your specific content to be made. They just haven't seen it yet. And when they see it, they're going to be really attracted to it because it's going to resonate with who they are. And I think that's what we see, like, friends of mine that, started creating shortly after I did, like that's how their audiences are so strong is because they created content that represented them and what they're doing and people resonate with that. And so I think like that's the hardest part is you just have to start doing it and then you have to keep doing it and you can't focus on like the views or the comments or anything like that. You just have to keep going.
And implement everything you already said in this call to dance to that.
100%.
Because
Yeah.
literally it's all the same. If you could give your younger self advice, what would it be?
Um, it's hard because I probably, if I did this, if I gave myself this piece of advice, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at, but I probably would have told myself to not start teaching when I did. Um, I think at this point, I'm thankful that I started as early as I did, but I think that it was really harmful not only to myself but to the kids that I was teaching as well. Because I was teaching like peers of mine, like people that I like hung out with on the weekends, and then I was like in class yelling at them because they didn't know their routines. Like it just wasn't a good place to be in. And I think maybe so that would be like probably one. I think the other one that like I think would be more effective is I would have told myself to just find a better like, find a mentor, like, find someone that, like, could have really, like, guided me along that process. I think that's probably what I would really tell myself.
Yeah, so underrated, the power of having a mentor, and they're so
100%.
accessible nowadays, you can find them
Yeah,
everywhere, we'll find the right
yeah,
one.
yeah.
If you had one key takeaway you wanted the listeners to remember from our conversation, what would it be?
I think it's that, like, you really can lead with, like, transparency and honesty, and you will find your people, and you'll find the people that appreciate that, and I think if you are leading with that, it becomes a really good um guide for you as a human. Because if I'm leading with transparency and honesty and I get some negativity online, it's really easy for me to be like, okay, was this my fault or not? Meaning, like, is this a moment where I just slipped up and didn't lead with transparency and honesty? Or is this genuinely how I feel? And so I feel like when you're leading with that, you can always sort of come back to that and use that as a backboard to either support yourself or recognize when maybe you weren't leading with transparency and honesty, or maybe you really don't believe what it is that you were saying. And I think it ultimately too just allows you to like lead a life that doesn't feel so like um fraudulent, I guess would be like a good answer, is like when you're leading with those two things, like you just feel a little bit safer in life, I feel like. So that would probably be the biggest thing that I would say is like transparency and honesty. And I think the second, on a more business note, would be to like really to like treat yourself as a business and treat your brand as a business, and like, you know, do some research on how businesses are structured and how, business people navigate their lives, and like, bring that over into your artistic world. And I think you'll be in a lot better place moving forward.
I love all of those, but especially the business thing. I've been harping on that a lot lately too, of the dancers are you are the business as a
Yeah.
dancer. You are a
Yeah.
business, whether you want to be or not, you're a business.
A
But
100%.
Jason, this has been so good. I'm gonna link all of your many places to find you, but just if someone wanted to like right now go look on their phone, where should they go to find you?
Yeah, I have two websites right now. So nsadance.com is where you can find out everything there is to know about No Starving Artists. And then heyitspickett.com is everything there is to know about me as an individual. And then you can find me everywhere online. Hey, it's Pickett.
Yay. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom, all of your inspiration. You guys share
Absolutely.
this episode with someone that needs to hear it. Go follow Jason if you don't already. And thanks for kicking it real with us. We'll see you next time.